All right, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is how to practice good cyber hygiene and security governance using the policies and procedures. So this is a great topic. There's such a vast amount of information in this domain. I think when I was first getting into the business, being able to know what the security terminology and principles are, what the controls are, and understanding that and countermeasures, getting into a lot of the frameworks, identifying what the standards and best practices are, but also figuring out a lot of the risk management components is super important. When I say that, I think that it makes sense for a lot of people to really think about their organization and how many things that you have to do to actually practice security. Really it comes down to what helps to really lock in our security posture. And typically that's done through the governance of security. And so throughout this domain, and when we talk about the fundamentals of security, you'll really hear a bunch of the things culminating into, but also having tentacles into many of the other domains as we go through the rest of the week. And so at a high level, understanding some of the basics is super important. The 3 tenets of information security are shown on the screen right here. That's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Oftentimes we call it the holy trinity, if you will, of information security. And that is the CIA triad. As we go in and talk about these different things, it's important for us to understand that these are really the fundamental principles of security. And by doing that, I think those core goals really give us the protection for any of the critical assets that we may have within our infrastructure. Each asset needs to be taken a look at and may require certain levels of protection that would adhere to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. First and foremost, when you start to look at the risk management framework, when you talk about the risk management framework and you're identifying a packet or a package for that RMF, typically right off the get-go, you're going to need to figure out what the level of risk that particular system comes in to play with the CIA triad. Is it a moderate? Is it a low? Is it a high? And so we try to find that watermark, the high watermark and the low watermark of those whenever we're doing the risk management framework. And so it's important to try to push these to our security objectives. So which of these 3 are the most important? It depends, right? It depends on what the organization is needing, and it depends on what we're talking about. I mean, if we're Netflix, it's probably availability. Think about that. Like, how reliable is the service? Are we giving timely access to the movies or the TV shows? If you're a network engineer, it's probably availability, right? Network devices need to have availability. DNS servers need to be up. DHCP servers, proxies, firewalls, all those components will give you a healthy network. So in that particular case, it might be availability. Whereas, if the accuracy of the information and the reliability of that information is the most important thing to your organization, in addition, maybe unauthorized modification and how you can prevent that, then integrity might be the most important thing. And so, it really depends, but one example that I think of is, think about with your bank statement. Let's say you had, $3,000 in your savings account, and all of a sudden, the next day you have $300,000 in your bank account. Or if I flip it on the other side, What if you know that you have $3,000, you didn't spend anything, next day you have $300, incorrectly modifying that data in different ways could corrupt the data, and then you lose the level of trust within that organization. And making those types of mistakes can have long-term effects in the interim. And so why is that important? Well, if you're dealing with system critical files or maybe forensically sound images of maybe you're testifying in court or maybe you're trying to find a needle in the haystack with doing a forensic analysis. Well, how can you ensure that what you're analyzing is what has been submitted for best evidence? And that really comes down to what's changed. And so applications usually will do some sort of input validation of some kind to ensure that those what you see is what you get whenever you're typing it in to the web server, what's submitted to the back end for data integrity purposes. And so in that particular case, integrity might be the most important thing. Well, what if we were not wanting people to see certain things? And so secrecy prevails as the most tantamount thing within our organization. So for instance, the DoD, the Office of Personnel Management. Well, things like making sure that we have the enforcement of the confidentiality and applying ways that we can process the information, but also preventing the unauthorized disclosure is very, very important. And whether it's locally or transmitted over the WAN, the cloud, or the internet, to make sure that it gets from where it's going to where it needs to be. And these are just simple ways that we can, try to identify the CIA triad in our organizations, but they're critical principles of security. And in order for you to understand the meaning of how these are, there's so many different mechanisms that come into play. And if any of these are absent in any way, it can definitely negatively affect your organization. So let's just look at something really quickly. What about this company right here? What is, out of these three, which one do you think is the most important to Amazon? Probably, all three of them are pretty important to Amazon, but, I think Jeff Bezos, when he came back for the second stint of being the CEO for Amazon, he came back and he said he doesn't care if he loses money. He just wants to make things available so people can, buy it from their website. And it's not just, buying things off the website, but Amazon Prime, Amazon Web Services. I mean, there's so much into the availability of their model that really they have taken over and are up in the leader of the Gartner right top quadrant. What about the Office of Personnel Management? So if you're a cleared federal contractor, OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, what's the most important thing to OPM? And I remember I was actually doing an assessment out in Arkansas for the Army as a contractor of a system. And on the way there, I was driving out there, which is, I think it's like a 5-hour, 6-hour drive from where I'm located in Huntsville. I was listening to NPR on the way, and I heard that OPM had been compromised. And, as a cleared federal contractor, that's a big deal, because think about everything on that standard Form 86 that you put in. It's basically everywhere that you've lived for the past 20 plus years. Who are all your next of kin? Who's your immediate family? Where have you worked? What medications are you on? Do you have any background investigations already done? And so to hear that and be one of the 41 million people that had been leaked, you really started to question whether or not confidentiality was the most important thing to them. But I think since then they've done a better job with that. So a couple of other terms that I'd like to bring into the fold for you here is what we typically will call in our business the IAAA. The IAAA. Yeah, so with the IAAA here, this is important because a lot of people, I think, as we get into this throughout the week, don't understand the process of how users are authenticated onto a network and a domain. And so in this order, we first identify, then we authenticate, then we authorize, all the while we're watching what everybody's doing and we're trying to audit them as well. And so we call it the IAAA because these really are super important when we're talking about risk management. One of the largest families of controls is the access controls. So if you look at any of the frameworks that are out there and you look at the AC controls or the access controls, specifically around the IAAA is a bunch of the baseline level of security controls are associated with the IAAA. And so we'll be jumping into these topics throughout the remainder of the week, but at a super high level, just understand that these are very important. And then some other, just off the top of the dome here, that is important. We talked about before the IAAA, the identification, the authentication, the authorization, and then the auditing. Well, there's also accountability and making sure that the data that we've collected has integrity, and that anybody who violates policies that we have can be held accountable for it. And so two words that typically you hear CISSP say are shown up here as well. There's the due care and the due diligence. So typically the way that I remember these is that you're constantly trying to perform due diligence by adhering to what we call the prudent person approach, where the way that I typically will remember this is what's the right thing to do. If I'm going out and looking for things to find on a customer's network, what's the right thing to do? Like, how can I put them into a position that I can sleep better at night whenever I'm actually trying to lock down their security? So I'm constantly out there doing threat hunting and trying to detect. So double D here, due diligence, do detect. And then once you detect it, what are you doing to practice due care and trying to correct it? So due diligence typically comes first. What are we doing to find it? And then the due care, what are we doing to practice and trying to actually correct it? And these are important security definitions whenever we jump into this.